Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 12 running back rankings for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about all things related to the running back position as we begin by talking about running back matchups. We'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season, on average in a half PPR scoring format. Then after that, of course, we'll talk about my top 36 running back rankings at a half PPR scoring format basis. Again, all of our rankings are half PPR based throughout the week, and rankings are always subject to change as it says above me. For those of you who are trying to stay up to date on my latest content and rankings, you can go over to my Patreon down in the description of the video. Now, before we begin today's video, let me remind everybody, again, there are timestamps down below in the description of the video. While you're down there, make sure you subscribe. We are on our way to 35,000 subscribers. I cannot thank you guys enough for the incredible support this season. Again, for those of you who are trying to continue to support, make sure you click that like button. Make sure you comment down below. It really does help grow the channel going forward. Outside of that, the Discord link is also down in the description of the video in the first line. For those of you who are trying to stay up to date on fantasy football information, ask questions, find a community, make friends in terms of fantasy football, and of course, get more and more information as the week progresses. That is the way to go about it. This upcoming Thursday, we will be having a live stream because, again, there are 3 games this upcoming Thanksgiving Day. So for those of you who are interested, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Kickoff with Kirchhoff. We'll be answering questions then. And for those of you who are in the Discord server or recently will join the Discord server, if you go over to the Ask Me Anything section and just post a question, I will be answering questions there this upcoming Thursday morning. Outside of that, I think we're good to go. Thank you guys for your incredible support. There are no teams on bye week this week, so everybody's going to be on the list. We'll be talking about a couple players that are contingent on injuries, whether it's Austin Ekeler, Raheem Mostert, Chris Carson, who could potentially return this week. We'll mention those kind of players along with other top 36 prospects. So let's get into this, shall we? Let's start talking about some running back matchups for Week 12 of the 2020 fantasy football season. As you can see on screen, the Detroit Lions are giving up the most points to opposing running backs thus far this season on average per week in a half PPR scoring format. Not only are they allowing 123 yards per game on average, 1.4 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs, but almost 50 receiving yards and a half receiving touchdown. 31.63 points is no joke, but unfortunately, the running back that's going to be taking advantage of this is only Duke Johnson. With David Johnson still on the injured reserve, it just seems like Duke Johnson has not been able to pull his weight as of the last couple of weeks. Hopefully, he can maybe string something together this upcoming Thursday and maybe put together a performance that we could be proud of. But as of right now, even though he has the greatest matchup at the running back position going into this upcoming week, it just unfortunately has landed in the wrong player's hands, in my opinion. Hopefully, he can go ahead and prove me wrong. Either way, the Houston Texans giving up the most rushing yards per game to opposing running backs on a consistent weekly basis. They are just getting torched on the ground. Is it a surprise? No, it's been happening all season long. But again, this upcoming week, DeAndre Swift, if in fact he comes back from that concussion, should be a fantastic play there. Of course, Kerryon Johnson, Adrian Peterson were no-shows this past week against an advantageous matchup against the Carolina Panthers. So again, hopefully it will be Swift back there. If it's not, we'll obviously mention where I rank Adrian Peterson and or Kerryon Johnson this week. The Green Bay Packers taking on David Montgomery, another running back in a great matchup that might not be able to take advantage of it. Again, David Montgomery in his career against the Green Bay Packers hasn't been great. And to be honest, David Montgomery all season long hasn't been great. He hasn't had a single 100-yard rushing game this season. The offensive line is terrible. The quarterback position is in a little bit of a flux with the injuries that they've sustained as the last couple of weeks. They're on a 4-game losing streak. It's just tough for the Chicago Bears and kind of hard for me to 100% take advantage of the Green Bay Packers matchup. The Las Vegas Raiders, they will be taking on the Atlanta Falcons this upcoming week. Of course, Todd Gurley needs to be able to get back on the horse and find himself a 10-point performance. He unfortunately had a tough matchup this past week, but hopefully we'll be able to right the ship this week against Las Vegas. The Carolina Panthers giving up a lot of points to opposing running backs, Jacksonville Jaguars, Tennessee Titans, New York Giants, New York Jets, Los Angeles Chargers. These are teams that are consistently giving up points, but mainly the reason that they're this high up is because they're giving up touchdowns to opposing running backs. If you just look a little bit lower down on the screen, the Miami Dolphins, Chiefs, Cowboys, Bills, and Cincinnati Bengals are giving up a bunch of yards on the ground, but they don't give up as many receiving touchdowns and or rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs, which is kind of slightly downgraded them. But all in all, these teams are still giving up a lot of points. These are all advantageous matchups to an extent. I really like anybody who plays against the Buffalo Bills defense as of late, or the Cowboys in that matter. Again, these are great matchups, even though they're lower down on the list. So just to kind of give you some perspective, We'll continue by talking about a couple defenses that aren't really giving up many points to opposing running backs. The New Orleans Saints only giving up 15 points per game to opposing running backs this season, 0.3 touchdowns per game on the ground. Again, that is a pretty small number. Nobody can really score on them, and it's not really a surprise. I think Melvin Gordon's going to be struggling, even though he had a fantastic pop-off week along with Phillip Lindsay. It's going to be tough to play against that defense, especially the way that offense was functioning. The Pittsburgh Steelers, as we all know, have been playing well on the ground. The Los Angeles Rams and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, both last night on Monday Night Football, proved to one another that you cannot run the ball in that game, and it's going to be a matter of who can throw the ball more consistently. Of course, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp came in the clutch with Jared Goff and got that done. The Indianapolis Colts have been playing well sideline to sideline with Darius Leonard, really locking down opposing running backs. This upcoming week, they take on one of the best, Derrick Henry. Should be an interesting matchup. Josh Jacobs gets to play against the Atlanta Falcons. The Rams backfield has to take on San Francisco, but these are some of the tougher matchups at the running back position, not really giving up many yards and or touchdowns to opposing running backs, just kind of giving you some perspective before we get into our rankings. Okay, now that we've covered that, we can go ahead and move on to our top 36 running back rankings on the week. Starting off with my number one, we have ourselves Dalvin Cook. Again, Dalvin Cook, as of right now in a half PPR scoring format, of course, is the number one overall running back, having only played 9 games. Now, the thing that I want to put in perspective, obviously we know we're starting Dalvin Cook this week. He plays against the Carolina Panthers. It was just 2 weeks ago where Ronald Jones had 192 rushing yards and a touchdown against them. So, of course, Dalvin Cook, a guy that is scoring every week and producing great numbers, is going to have himself a number one fantasy week potentially. So the only thing that I really wanted to mention and kind of give you guys some perspective on, besides the fact that he went for 115 yards on the ground last week for a touchdown, 5 catches for 45 yards on the Dallas Cowboys, which we anticipated, of course. But the fact of the matter is that he is so much significantly better this year than he was last year that it's pretty ridiculous. Last year, he played 14 games for the Minnesota Vikings. Of course, missed 2 games late in the season due to an injury. The fact of the matter is, in those 14 games, he had 13 rushing touchdowns. In only the first 9 games of the season that he's played this year, he already has 13 rushing touchdowns. So he is on pace to shatter last year's record. He was averaging about 19 fantasy points per game last season. It's out about 25 this season, so almost an extra 6 points, which is a rushing touchdown extra per game this season. He's been playing out of his mind. As long as he continues to stay healthy, should be fantastic. For those of you who are Dalvin Cook owners, make sure prior to getting to the fantasy playoffs, you have Alexander Mattison on your roster. Again, you don't want to be caught. In fact, if he gets injured, God forbid, but we just got to be precautious of the matter. Moving on to our number 2, we have ourselves Alvin Kamara. And, even though Alvin Kamara didn't have the greatest week last week, in fact, he had a record-breaking week for his own standards. It was the first time in Alvin Kamara's career that he had ever had 0 receptions in a single game. Not once did he ever have 0 receptions before, and it was actually quite crazy. And I went and I looked at his stat log and his game logs throughout his entire career. There were 3 other games in which he only had 1 catch, but this is the first time he'd ever caught the ball 0 times. The only other times that he had only had 1 target was, in fact, 2 years ago on the exact day, November 22nd, 2018 against the Atlanta Falcons. So interestingly enough, the Falcons have done some, pretty good work against him in the passing game, but regardless, a lot of people are worried about him and his potential going forward with Taysom Hill at the quarterback position. They're assuming that it's, because Taysom Hill has the ability to run the ball and he wasn't looking for Kamara and targeting him as much, that perhaps Kamara won't have as much value going forward. The fact of the matter is, Alvin Kamara is the number 2 running back in fantasy for a reason. He is productive. He's going to get the goal line work, and I can guarantee you his targets are going to increase along with his receptions. It's only a matter of time. Playing against Denver this upcoming week, in my opinion, is a good matchup. Of course, we don't want to see him with 1 target per game. I don't think that's going to continue. Of course, getting a guy like Michael Thomas more involved in the offense will pull targets away from Alvin Kamara, who has benefited so much from the fact that Michael Thomas missed majority of the season. But going forward, I do anticipate Alvin Kamara to continue to get work and continue to get more utilization. Whether it is on the ground or through the air, he is still going to be a top running back, and that is why he is my number 2 this week. It shouldn't be a surprise. You're obviously automatically starting him. My number 3 running back on the week is Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb has done something that's very impressive. In the last 4 consecutive games that he's played fully, of course not counting the Dallas Cowboy game in which he left midway through the first half, he has had 4 consecutive games of 100-plus rushing yards. He's coming off of a week against the Philadelphia defense, which again is a tougher defense, in which he had 20 rushing attempts for 114 rushing yards. Unfortunately, he did not have an opportunity at a touchdown in comparison to Kareem Hunt, who had many of opportunities to score. Regardless, Nick Chubb is a fantastic player. He's really starting to pick it up as he's come off the injured reserve, and he looks fantastic, of course. He's playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. They give up the 6th most points to opposing running backs. It just seems like an automatic play. If he's consistently getting upwards of 100 rushing yards, he's getting himself, 39 rushing attempts in just the past 2 weeks. It's only going to, continue to be great for him. 20 plus rushing attempts for any running back is workhorse territory. And once you get there, once you either break out a big run against Jacksonville and or find yourself in the red zone and getting goal line rushing attempts, he's going to be able to score a lot of points this upcoming week. I'm excited about his potential. I think, of course, because of the fact that this passing attack with Baker Mayfield, they haven't passed the touchdown for 3 weeks now. I mean, it's pretty tough to assume that offense is going to be able to pass the ball more, but as long as they continue to rely upon the running game, Nick Chubb's going to be able to deliver for them. We have Derrick Henry as our number 4, and Derrick Henry really did kind of transform into playoff Derrick Henry just this past week against the Baltimore Ravens. It practically was a playoff game. Went to overtime, was resulted in a field goal win by Stephen Gostkowski, who has missed many of those this year regardless. But Derrick Henry with 28 rushing attempts had 133 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 2 targets, 1 catch for -1 receiving yards, 19.7 fantasy points. Looking at his potential, if Derrick Henry continues to get this kind of workload, now that we're getting into the later half of the regular season near the fantasy football playoff Derrick Henry is a different animal. He really becomes King Henry at that point, and he could potentially this upcoming week playing against the Indianapolis Colts in a much needed win against a division rival get upwards of 30 touches. If in fact he can do so, he can definitely perform. It was just a couple weeks back, week 10, in which Derrick Henry had 20 total touches for 109 yards against the Indianapolis Colts. He's certainly capable of, averaging 5 yards per touch against that team. And I think if, in fact, they increase his workload, they keep it closer. Of course, the special teams fell apart for Tennessee in the second half. Keep it closer. Let Derrick Henry dictate the game. I think he can absolutely dominate against any defense. He should be a great play this upcoming week as my number 4. My number 5 for this upcoming week is James Robinson. And the thing that I want to point out first and foremost is the fact that he was incredible against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I talk about it all the time. Pittsburgh stops running backs. In fact, they stop wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I tuned into the game on Sunday, and at the end of the first quarter, Jake Luton was like 3 for 13 passing. So again, that offense is struggling. And even though the Jacksonville Jaguars offense has the least amount of rushing attempts amongst the entire NFL right now, James Robinson has still been incredible as a fantasy prospect. He's already surpassed 1,000 rushing yards this season. He put up 94 all-purpose yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers defense and surpassed 10.4 fantasy points. So again, being able to cross that marker, get the ample amount of touches on a weekly basis, and since week 7 has been the number 5 overall fantasy back in a half PPR scoring format, the consistency is there. This upcoming week, they have a far more advantageous matchup. Even though Cleveland has been good against running backs, it is a far better matchup in comparison to Pittsburgh, of course. So I think playing at home, James Robinson should be comfortable and should be good to go. As my number 5 back, of course, he's an automatic start and a stud play. My number 6 for this week is Antonio Gibson of the Washington football team. And to be honest, as the weeks have progressed, he's continued to rise in my rankings based on his continued consistency. In the last 4 contests, he has had 5 rushing touchdowns. That is fantastic. 4 consecutive games of a rushing touchdown. Obviously, those kind of numbers are going to lead to success in fantasy football. The fact that he accompanies it with a couple receptions every game is great. Of course, we'd like to see him get more with J.D. McKissic stealing a lot of the targets, but even with that said, he's getting a lot of opportunity in that offense. 16 rushing attempts just this past week for a total of 94 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. I'll take that, especially considering the fact that he plays against the Dallas Cowboys this upcoming week, which again, give up the 2nd most rushing yards to opposing running backs this season. I mean, if we go back to week 7, in which, of course, the Washington football team has already played against the Dallas Cowboys, that was a game in which Antonio Gibson really had a breakout performance. 20 total rushing attempts for 128 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. So again, we've seen Antonio Gibson himself produce against this defense. And we've seen just in the past couple weeks, Dalvin Cook, 160 total all-purpose yards and a touchdown. And Kenyan Drake, 164 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns against the Dallas Cowboys. So, of course, the Pittsburgh Steelers running backs couldn't take advantage of it. But I still think that the Dallas Cowboys defense, though they played better this past Sunday against and were able to compete against the Minnesota Vikings, they still had their holes that they gave up to Dalvin Cook. And I do think that this defense is going to have a hard time stopping the run from Antonio Gibson. That is why I have him as my number 6 this week in a pretty good matchup. we have Ezekiel Elliott, speaking of the Dallas Cowboys, as my number 7. He is progressively rising, and I thought he would have a good week this last week, and he did. I'm glad that he was able to accompany his 100-yard rushing game with a receiving touchdown. Scoring that extra touchdown really does take him above and beyond into the RB1 category on a consistent basis. So I think, of course, there is a very good potential that Ezekiel Elliott, with the momentum of that offense continuing, could end up being a consistent play. Now, in week 7, when Antonio Gibson was frying his defense, he wasn't able to reciprocate the favor. Unfortunately, that was the game that Andy Dalton went down, and the offense was checked. And the offensive line did not help him up. And I think this upcoming week is a bit of a revenge game. I think the Cowboys can smell it, and they can potentially see themselves making the playoffs. Even though Zeke, the last time he played against Washington, only had 12 carries for 45 yards, I truly do think that this past weekend's game gave him more confidence, gave more confidence to the coaching staff, the players of that offense, and going into this matchup should be a good one. Just to kind of give you some perspective as to some of the running backs who have dominated against this Washington football team defense as of the last couple of weeks. DeAndre Swift went for 149 total yards and a touchdown. Wayne Gallman went for 77 and a touchdown, and James Conner went for 149 total and a touchdown. So again, there are a lot of teams that have played well against this defense. Don't take it out of proportion and think Zeke's going to be the number 1. But I'm just saying there's been some pretty nice performances against them. I think as long as Zeke continues to get ample opportunity, he should be a pretty solid play as my number 7 this week. We have number 8, Aaron Jones. And I think despite any matchup Aaron Jones plays against, he's almost matchup proof to an extent. In the last 3 consecutive weeks, he's had over 10 fantasy points. Just this past week, against a tough defense like the Indianapolis Colts, had himself 15.1 fantasy points, obviously accompanied with 1 rushing touchdown, 41 rushing yards, 4 catches for 30 yards. His utilization in the passing game continues to get him more and more value, and that in itself is a great thing to see. I just think that, playing against the Chicago Bears, it is a tough matchup. We know that for sure. It took Dalvin Cook 30 rushing attempts to get to 97 rushing yards. So again, it is definitely going to be a tougher task at hand, but with Aaron Rodgers being able to air it out and get him more utilization in the passing game and eventually get the team into the red zone and scoring, I think Aaron Jones has a lot of value. I think his consistency of play is really relied upon the offense and their consistency in getting into the red zone. They've done that on a consistent basis all season long. This offense has been practically unstoppable. And when, in fact, this defense ends up sending the pass rush in his direction, making it difficult in terms of coverage, being able to double cover a guy like Davante Adams, he will look to Aaron Jones. They will get him more utilized in this offense this week. I think Aaron Jones should be a great play as my number 8 this upcoming week. We move on to our number 9. We have DeAndre Swift. So Swift is dealing with a concussion. If, in fact, he plays this week, I think he has got a great chance of having a breakout performance once again, playing against the Houston Texans defense that give up the second most points to opposing running backs this season and have given up the most rushing yards to opposing running backs this season on average per week. Just giving out some of the recent performances against that defense. It's pretty crazy, but again, we've seen Dalvin Cook put 146 and 2 rushing touchdowns on them. We've seen Derrick Henry put 264 and 2 touchdowns against them. We've seen James Robinson with 99 and 1, Jamal Williams 114 and 1, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt combined for 230 yards and a touchdown. And just this past week, we had ourselves Damien Harris and James White combined for 137 total yards and a touchdown. Every backfield has been able to dominate against this Houston defense on a consistent basis. The fact that Detroit is still giving up the most points to opposing running backs this season is a surprise. I think as of right now, DeAndre Swift, if in fact he's healthy, should be a great play. The last time we saw him had 81 rushing yards, was the starting running back, had 5 catches for 68 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Should be a great play if in fact he's healthy. If he's not, I think Adrian Peterson and Kerryon Johnson are like in the 30s in my rankings. And we would just have to hope that maybe they fall in the end zone. But again, it's just tough to rely upon a team like that at the running back position when they're getting shut out against the Carolina Panthers of all teams who struggle against stopping the run. I think they give up the 5th most points to opposing running backs. So either way, if it's not DeAndre Swift, forget about it. But if DeAndre Swift is ready to go by Thursday, I'm excited about his overall potential. We have Josh Jacobs as our number 10 running back this upcoming week playing against the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons have yet to give up a 90-yard rusher this season. But that's no problem for Josh Jacobs because he really doesn't run for that many yards anyway, considering every third drive we have Devontae Booker coming in stealing carries. But it is what it is. That is the entire volume that we anticipate. He had 17 touches for 55 yards and a rushing touchdown. He has had 4 rushing touchdowns in just the last 3 games, which is a great number to consistently see as he's producing. Here's the thing about Josh Jacobs. If in fact he's not getting receptions out of the backfield, that definitely hurts him. The fact that he's not getting upwards of 20 to 25 rushing attempts like a Derrick Henry or a Dalvin Cook, that has definitely hurt him. And the touchdowns are really becoming a dependent factor of his entire overall productivity on a given week. Playing against the Atlanta Falcons, I'm hoping that when they get down to the 1 yard line, we're not passing the ball to Darren Waller and to Jason Witten for touchdowns. I'm hoping that there's going to be more touchdowns in the direction of Josh Jacobs, but that's just how the offense has worked. They've stolen a lot of touchdowns from him. You just got to hope he falls into the end zone early, and everything after is going to be gravy. But regardless, again, he's one of the better backs in the National Football League, in my opinion, in a tougher matchup, but still should be able to produce. We have Mike Davis as our number 11. So Mike Davis, as of right now, I'm assuming Christian McCaffrey's out as he's week to week, and Matt Rule has not really given any information regarding it. I'm pretty sure he's going to miss this week. So Mike Davis, coming off a fantastic performance in which he had, again, a backup quarterback there with PJ Walker, was still able to consistently run the ball even though the defense was stacking the box. But again, PJ Walker, the credit goes to him being able to, feed the ball to DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and of course Curtis Samuel to give Mike Davis a little bit of cushion in the running game. But either way, Mike Davis, 64 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, had himself 2 catches for 15 yards and 14.9 fantasy points. Overall, a great week. Plays against the Minnesota Vikings this upcoming week. Again, Ezekiel Elliott had 114 all-purpose yards and a touchdown against them. The Lions running backs a couple weeks back had a total of 205 yards against them. Jamal Williams, 102 yards against them. So again, they've given up a fair share of points. To be honest, even though the Minnesota Vikings haven't been scored on as of late, the Minnesota Vikings starting the season weren't very good at stopping the run either. So I don't really think that this is a team can really hide. I know they aren't giving up too many points to opposing running backs as of right now, but if we go back to weeks 1 through 5, they were giving up on average 17.34 points to opposing running backs per week. That was just starting running backs in general. That wasn't even including the backup. So again, anybody who starts against this team should be able to produce pretty good numbers. Obviously, we were able to witness that from Zeke last week. And I think going forward, Mike Davis still got great value with Christian McCaffrey out. We have Todd Gurley as our number 12, the thumbnail himself. I wanted to throw Todd Gurley up on the board because, again, he plays against the Las Vegas Raiders. They give up the 4th most points to opposing running backs. And even though Todd Gurley only had 8 rushing attempts for 26 rushing yards this past week against the New Orleans Saints, of course, a incredibly difficult matchup in which they stopped the run better than just about anybody in the National Football League. And it happens. That team had to pass the ball majority of the second half in order to keep up. Julio Jones going out didn't help them. But either way, the Las Vegas Raiders matchup for Todd Gurley should be able to get him back on track. As of right now, Todd Gurley relies upon a touchdown. That's really his entire base. Unless he scores a 6-point influx of a touchdown, he's not going to be a great fantasy play. So as of right now, I do have confidence in Todd Gurley based purely on the fact that he's in an advantageous matchup and the Las Vegas Raiders have given up a good amount of touchdowns. There's only been 3 weeks this season that the Las Vegas Raiders haven't given up a touchdown to an opposing running back. So 7 out of the 10 games, they're, allowing opposing running backs to score on them on a weekly basis. So I think that the matchup, based on the fact that the Las Vegas Raiders, they do give up a good chunkage of yards on the ground and give up a fair share of touchdowns, and the fact that probably Julio Jones will be a game time decision. They'll have to rely upon the running game even more this week. It leans in the direction of Todd Gurley potentially having himself a great performance against a very good team. Though the Las Vegas Raiders lost on Sunday Night Football, they proved that they're just as good as anybody in that AFC. So either way, I think Todd Gurley has himself an advantageous matchup and could potentially take care of it by falling into the end zone and getting you some fantasy points. We have number 13, Miles Sanders. My only issue with Miles Sanders is the fact that this team doesn't want to run the ball more. I mean, Miles Sanders has been playing great. 16 rushing attempts for 66 yards. I know he fumbled early, but as soon as he fumbled, they got the possession back and they passed the entire time until Nick Foles threw a pick 6, literally. So I don't know what it is with Doug Peterson. I know he wants to pass the ball a lot. This team is in the top 5 in terms of passing attempts, in the bottom 5 in terms of rushing attempts. I mentioned that last week, and it's going to continue to stay like that until, in fact, they want to change it. This upcoming week, they take on the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle Seahawks give up a fair share of points to opposing running backs, mainly because since week 8, they've given up 8 rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs. So, again, in just a few couple weeks, they've given up a lot of touchdowns to backs. But I don't know if Miles Sanders will be able to take advantage of that. I don't know if the Philadelphia Eagles are in a position to be able to at least feed him the ball, even though Seattle does give up a good amount of touchdowns. Since week 8, running backs against the Seattle Seahawks have scored 8 total touchdowns. That's a pretty good number. And to be honest, I think that there's going to be an advantage here for Miles Sanders to be able to score. It's going to be obviously up to Carson Wentz getting him down to the red zone, but we've seen Miles Sanders be a bursty runner and be able to go for 75 yards and a touchdown or make a big play like a 60-yard run. We've seen him capable of doing so. But my only issue is if, in fact, this offense doesn't continue to run the ball, if they get blown out early in this game on Monday Night Football, it may lead to, of course, that team having to rely upon Carson Wentz in the second half and not getting enough utilization out of Miles Sanders. That's my only concern. Also, there's only been one running back to run for over 100 yards against the Seattle Seahawks. It was Alexander Mattison. Outside of that, the only other running back to eclipse over 64 rushing yards against that defense was Dalvin Cook. So only in that game against the Minnesota Vikings has there been success against Seattle's defense on the ground in terms of rushing yards. So it's going to be difficult for them to run the ball. Will they band it in early? I think there's a possibility of them doing so. I'm just hoping that's not the case. But that is why I have Miles Sanders at 13, just again to give you some perspective. Number 14 is Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt could have easily had 2 rushing touchdowns and been a top 5 back last week. He had so many rushing attempts, in that early half of that game, in which even that 4th and 1 opportunity where he reached over but his elbow was down, honestly could have had 2 rushing touchdowns. He's becoming a little bit of a vulture, but again, even though he had 13 rushing attempts for 11 rushing yards, I think that's going to improve. That's not something that's going to happen on a weekly basis. It's just a matter of on those rushing attempts, the offensive line fell apart, the blocking scheme fell apart, or of course the defense made plays. There's always the potential of that, even though the discrepancy of, Kareem Hunt averaging less than 1 yard per carry, and then you have Nick Chubb going for over 100 yards again. That's always going to happen. That's just, the nature of the beast of that offense. Either way, I think Kareem Hunt continues to still have value against Jacksonville this upcoming week. And I think as long as he's scoring touchdowns and getting ample opportunity upwards of 10 to 15 touches a week, he is still going to have great value in this offense. We have ourselves Chris Carson as our number 15. Now, I wanted to mention Chris Carson first and foremost because he looked like he was potentially going to come back this past week on Thursday Night Football against the Arizona Cardinals. Unfortunately, he was not able to come back, and Carlos Hyde took over. Carlos Hyde has been great in the absence of course, Chris Carson. But to be honest, all running backs have been great in the absence of Chris Carson. Whether it was DJ Dallas, Travis Homer, and Chris Carson, these running, or even Alex Collins coming off of the practice squad, all running backs in the Seattle Seahawks offense in their scheme continue to succeed and continue to find the end zone over the last couple weeks, which has kind of just given them a balanced value that you can always start on a weekly basis. So if in fact it is going to be Chris Carson this week, they're going to give him the entire workload. He is going to be healthy, and they're not going to force him to return too early because they know they are in the playoff hunt. They don't need him to return this week because they need him for later down the line. Regardless, I think coming off the midfoot sprain, he should be a fantastic play. He should have just as much value as Carlos Hyde had last week, and that's what I kind of wanted to mention. If in fact Chris Carson is not going to play this week, Carlos Hyde still sits at this number 15 rank. I think regardless of who's starting at the starting running back position of the Seattle Seahawks, whether it is Chris Carson or Carlos Hyde, they have so much value. And innately, because in fact this offense is so valuable in terms of scoring and getting down in the red zone as often as they had, Russell Wilson not throwing as many touchdowns, that's going to the running back position. So again, I think Carlos Hyde just as much value, but either way, I anticipate Chris Carson to come back, and we'll leave him on the screen. Our number 16 for this week is Jonathan Taylor, and I think Jonathan Taylor has proven a lot of us wrong and right at the same time. I don't know how to explain it. It's just so confusing at this point. Jonathan Taylor was given ample opportunity just a couple weeks back against Tennessee. He faltered. He did not perform. He was replaced for Nyheim Hines, who came in, scored 2 touchdowns, and was really the determining factor of that Indianapolis Colts offense winning that game. And then we all thought, Jonathan Taylor, the experiment's over. The Jonathan Taylor era of this backfield is done. And all we heard going into week 11 against the Green Bay Packers was Nyheim Hines is going to get more touches. Nyheim Hines is going to be more part of this offense. He is the starting back. The coaches are talking him up. And to be honest, they were just blowing smoke. That's just what it truly was. Jonathan Taylor came out with 22 rushing attempts, reestablished himself as a lead back, had himself 90 rushing yards, had a rushing touchdown called back. He easily could have had an extra 40 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown if it wasn't for all those holding penalties from the wide receivers. My goodness, was that annoying to watch on Sunday afternoon football against the Green Bay Packers. Goodness, they should have been able to dominate if in fact those holding calls weren't happening, but they were egregious enough to be called. So I respect the calls, doesn't matter. The fact that, of course, Jonathan Taylor, as well as getting 4 targets, 4 receptions, and 24 receiving yards, my goodness, this is the Jonathan Taylor we wanted to see, and this is what we're going to potentially see going forward. They play against Tennessee. Another week for him to have a great matchup. The 7th most points to opposing running backs. J.K. Dobbins just went for 70 yards and a touchdown against them on the ground. Nyheim Hines 2 weeks ago, 70 yards and a touchdown on the ground. 45 through the air and a touchdown. And the Cincinnati backfield, whether it was Giovani Bernard or Samaje Perine, they combined for a total of 94 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 18 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Tennessee can't stop the run. They can't stop running backs. I think Jonathan Taylor this week should be a great play. I'm excited about his potential. Let's go, Taylor. Come on. Let's get us in the right direction before the fantasy playoffs start. We need you. Number 17 this week is Wayne Gallman, and we've talked about him to an extent, whether it was in the waiver wire section or just in the purely, weekly rankings. He is scoring touchdowns and getting himself more and more opportunity out of this backfield. Sure, there are other running backs like Dion Lewis and Alfred Morris that are taking touches, and I'm aware of that, but it does not really take away that much value from Wayne Gallman. Even though Wayne Gallman is only playing 50% of the snaps and only getting 58% of the touches or something, he is still getting the correct touches. He is still getting the goal line attempts that are taking it over the top and getting him into the relevant RB2 range. With 10 rushing attempts, increasing to 12, 14, 18 as of the last 4 games he's played. That's a great sign to see. He has scored 5 touchdowns in just the last 4 games he's played. And from weeks 7 through 10, in which obviously he didn't play in week 11 because of the bye week, but from week 7 through 10, he was the number 3 overall running back in fantasy half PPR. So again, in the last 4 games, averaging 14.8 fantasy points per game, playing against the Cincinnati Bengals this upcoming week. Of course, we just saw Antonio Gibson go for 94-1, Derrick Henry 112-1, and Kareem Hunt 102-1 against that defense. Cincinnati really can't stop running backs, and I think, of course, Wayne Gallman in this offense that could potentially win their division are on their way to potentially have themselves a pretty good game here. We have number 18, Ballage of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, Ballage is doing some incredible things for the Chargers offense. Besides the fact that, he's running the ball consistently. I know his yard per carry average this past week wasn't great. 16 rushing attempts for 44 yards, not the great, but holy moly, what he did in the passing game. 9 total targets, 7 receptions, 27 receiving yards. 7 receptions, my goodness. In a half or a full PPR, doesn't matter. That is so much value that you're not typically getting from a running back like this. He is typically a guy that's just going to plug it up the middle and hopefully he scores a touchdown. But getting 7 receptions, I'm telling you guys, when Austin Ekeler returns, it's a different story. But regardless, they play against the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo Bills cannot stop running backs. They cannot stop the run. Just putting it into perspective, Kenyan Drake went for 100 yards against them. We had DJ Dallas go for 31 and a touchdown. We had Derrick Henry for 102 and a touchdown. The Jets running backs, Perine and Frank Gore, went for 101 against them combined. CEH went for 161 against them. There are more performances even after that. But, we only have so much time. I think the Buffalo Bills defense, they're going to be in trouble. I think Ballage, if he starts, a fantastic RB2 option this week with good upside. Now, if in fact Austin Ekeler is ready to go, we saw him squatting 3 plates on each side. That's 315 pounds. He's just repping it out. I love to see it. Austin Ekeler is the guy that I touted all off season because I anticipated this offense to improve. And with the way that Justin Herbert's playing and the way that he's targeting Ballage 9 times per game, imagine what we're going to see from Austin Ekeler once he comes back. He's going to be 10 catches per game. That's what we can at least anticipate. And not only is he going to get those receptions, but he's a significantly better yard after the catch kind of guy in comparison to Ballage, who's 6'2", 230 and not as elusive. So again, if Austin Ekeler is ready to go, in my opinion, he's a top 10 back this week, easily, without a doubt in my mind. But either way, it will be a little bit of a committee situation. But as of right now, I anticipate for sure Ballage to start and play this week. Should be a great play there. We have James Conner as our number 19. James Conner had a little bit of life this past week. He kind of proved to me specifically that, I still got my legs. They're still underneath me. Even though I'm tired, I'm going to get going. 13 rushing attempts for 89 rushing yards against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was supposed to play well. They gave up the 6th most points to opposing running backs. And the unfortunate matter was that Benny Snell came in and stole a touchdown. That's just the nature of the beast, and that's Mike Tomlin for you, right? But either way, I think the fact that he was able to get yardage, 89 on the ground, 10 through the air on 3 receptions and 3 targets, great. Plays against Baltimore this week. They are missing Calais Campbell and Brandon Williams, both of their interior defensive linemen that really do help in stopping the run. They still have Derek Wolfe, but in my opinion, Brandon Williams is one of the better one-shade nose guards in the National Football League, along with Calais Campbell just causing havoc inside the interior of the offensive line. Without that happening, David DeCastro, these guys should be able to, and Mike Pouncey, they should just be able to open up holes, allow James Conner to run freely. Should be a pretty good game for them. I think James Conner, obviously touchdown upside would be fantastic, but this offense likes to throw the ball and they like to hand it off to other guys on the goal line. So James Conner takes a little bit of a dip in my rankings, but regardless, should be a great value play this week. Moving on to our number 20, we have ourselves Kenyan Drake. And to be honest, I think Kenyan Drake had a pretty good game this past Thursday against Seattle. Even though his yards per carry average wasn't great, getting a touchdown, beautiful, fantastic. We love to see it. But his utilization in the passing game is really what took him over the edge. 5 targets, 4 receptions, 31 yards. Kenyan Drake hasn't really gotten a lot of receptions and or targets this season because of Chase Edmonds' continuous, obviously, utilization in this offense. But to be honest, if they can get him more opportunity there, we've definitely seen him be able to produce, whether it was last year or even with the Dolphins in 2018. He is a receiving back. He's capable of it. He is great after the catch. He's an elusive back. So if Kenyan Drake is given the opportunity, there's even more fantasy value to be had. This upcoming week, they have a tougher matchup. I know the New England Patriots in the last couple of weeks have been good against stopping the run, but it wasn't long ago in which they were getting torched on the ground. Phillip Lindsay went for 101 rushing yards against them. We saw Jeff Wilson Jr. for 120 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns against them. And they have Zack Moss put up 81 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns against them. So again, New England's defense, that's their biggest weakness. They've got a great secondary, but they struggle against the run. So if Kenyan Drake could take advantage of it, that'd be fantastic. I think he's a decent play as my number 20. We have 21, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Clyde Edwards, thank goodness you got touches. My goodness, we were waiting so long. There was 3 weeks in which you were getting single-digit touches. You were relying upon touchdowns, and even though this week you got yourself 14 rushing attempts for 69 yards, the biggest difference maker was 2 rushing touchdowns. The touchdowns are the biggest difference maker in this offense, and that is my biggest concern because you play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers now. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers have not given up more than 50 rushing yards to any running back outside of Christian McCaffrey in week 2 of the 2020 season. So they haven't given up rushing yards. Sure, they can give up a rushing touchdown here and there, but they are a stout front seven. You're just watching last night's Monday Night Football game. It's apparent. They are one of the best run-stopping teams in the league. They pride themselves on that, and that's what Todd Bowles pretty much chalks up. Get after the quarterback and, of course, send pressure and be able to stop the run. That's what they do, and that's what they do best. So even with Clyde Edwards coming off a great week, I think Patrick Mahomes is going to have to pass the whole time. We don't see enough utilization from Clyde Edwards in the passing game to find more, value there. He's not going to be a guy to catch the ball 8 times. He's just not, he hasn't been that for the Chiefs this year. So maybe he ends up turning it around. But either way, I think it's tough enough of a matchup where, I'm a little bit lower on him than many others. Damien Harris is my number 22. Again, Damien Harris having himself a rushing touchdown made his week. Unfortunately, he disappeared in the offense because of the fact that the Houston Texans took an early lead and it forced Cam Newton to have to pass the ball for the majority of the second half. But either way, 11 rushing attempts for 43 yards. The fact that Rex Burkhead's dealing with an injury gives more opportunity to Damien Harris, but I think Sony Michel will return and be active this upcoming week against the Arizona Cardinals. Arizona's been pretty good against the run themselves, but of course, this is a run-first offense in New England. Damien Harris is still the starting running back, and I think based on his opportunity, getting ample amount of touches, and potentially some more goal line work in his near future, I think his value is just kind of etched in to the entire identity of this New England Patriots offense. So he's going to have value regardless of the matchup. He should be good as my number 22. Number 23 is Salvon Ahmed. So here's the thing. You play against the New York Jets. They give the 9th most points to opposing running backs. That is not a surprise. They give up a lot. Salvon Ahmed is coming off of a game in which he had 5 catches for 31 yards. Great numbers there. We love to see it. Hopefully that continues. 12 rushing attempts for 43 yards. If Myles Gaskin is not returned this week and is not ready and is not given the full opportunity, Salvon Ahmed is going to be running the ball for the majority of that game because I do anticipate this team taking an early lead. Even though the Miami Dolphins offense looked terrible against Denver last week, they're going to have to go and recalibrate and figure it out. And if and when they do, they will be better. Salvon Ahmed will be better in terms of his yards per carry on the ground. He'll go back to having those 20 carries for 100 total instead of 12 for 40. I think it'll be far better in their direction. And as of right now, I think Salvon Ahmed has a lot of value, especially with having the entire backfield to himself practically. We have Zack Moss as a number 24, mainly because of the matchup. I don't think Zack Moss has proven to be a stable enough running back to command himself as a flex play or an RB2 play, but I think based on the fact that the Los Angeles Chargers, not only did they give up the 10th most points to opposing running backs, but since week 7, they've given up 8 total touchdowns to opposing running backs. That in itself kind of leads me to think this team is definitely hemorrhaging in terms of down in the goal line, down in the red zone. They really can't stop the run. Josh Allen's going to easily be able to move the ball down the field. And if and when they do, Devin Singletary is not really a part of this offense anymore. It's going to go to Zack Moss. He's been getting more and more rushing attempts, has scored 3 rushing touchdowns in the last 3 games that he's played. So again, I think Zack Moss does have the opportunity and could find himself in the end zone. If and when he does, they will get the ball more often, be able to run it in the second half, and find more value there. He's my number 24. Number 25 is Gus Edwards. Because of the fact that, of course, Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins are going to miss, Gus Edwards has value. The last time he played against Pittsburgh earlier this season, had himself 16 rushing attempts for 87 yards and a touchdown. The time prior that he played against them, week 17 of the 2019 season, had over 100 rushing yards against that defense. So Gus Edwards has definitely played well. My only concern is that this offense isn't the same. Without J.K. Dobbins in the offense, there's not going to be the opportunity to have a running back go for, 15 rushing attempts and 113 rushing yards and to make first downs on every play. The drive is going to stall out eventually, and it is really going to hurt them because there are a lot of negative plays in Gus Edwards' scheme. Like in those 16 rushing attempts for 87 yards and a touchdown against Pittsburgh a couple weeks back, there are plays in which he's getting -5 rushing yards or getting stuffed at the line. And sure, there are breakout runs of 20 to 30 yards here and there, but I still think that there is an opportunity for this offense to struggle. As they've not played well this season, it is going to force Lamar Jackson to pass, and Gus Edwards has not really been a receiving back. They might have to bring Justice Hill back in this conversation and get him more utilization. So again, Gus Edwards, I trust him, but only as a flex play if you need it, especially considering he does not have flex upside in the PPR format. We have Ronald Jones at number 26. Ronald Jones disappeared last night. Had 10 rushing attempts for 24 yards. But again, the Los Angeles run-stopping defense, they're great. Kansas City, on the other hand, they've struggled all of the last, 3 seasons in terms of stopping the run. They are not a run-stopping defense. They just can't do it. And where they want to succeed is by scoring enough to where you have to pass and where their secondary can feast. And it forces you to cause, turnovers. But as of right now, I think Tom Brady did not look good last night, but I think the running game is going to be where they succeed the most this upcoming week against Kansas City. In order to keep Patrick Mahomes off the field, you have to find a stable running game. I think Ronald Jones is still the starting running back in this offense. Perhaps he doesn't get as many targets out of the backfield in comparison to Leonard Fournette, but I still think that in terms of rushing attempts, he should be able to have himself a pretty good game this week against the Kansas City Chiefs and find himself some fantasy relevance. My number 27 this week is Melvin Gordon. And, my issue is his inconsistency. His consistency is being inconsistent, to be honest. That's just the fact of the matter this year. I mean, he plays against the Raiders a couple weeks back, has a terrible performance. They're not able to run the ball. Their offense falls apart. Then the following week, they come out against a team that has honestly played great on defense as of the last couple weeks. And then they just torture him on the ground for 84 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. But this week, the reason why I have Melvin Gordon at 27, even though many of you may think he should be higher based on his last week's performance, those points don't carry over. He has to now go and play against the New Orleans Saints, a defense that stops the run that is their identity of their defense. They stop the run. They force you to have to pass the ball. And Drew Lock, if you want to force him to pass the ball, could turn over the ball on a consistent basis. So I think Melvin Gordon's going to be in trouble. Unless he's getting work out of the passing game, which he hasn't done as of late, I think it's going to be a really tough matchup for them. Phillip Lindsay getting more and more utilization, stealing touches here and there, definitely does diminish his value. I think Melvin Gordon, even though he is a great running back, is going to have a tough matchup this week. We have Duke Johnson as our number 28. I'm not too confident about this either. I think the fact that the Detroit Lions give up the most points to opposing running backs, 31.36 fantasy points per week to opposing running backs. I mean, anybody can produce against them. It is just a fact at this point. Mike Davis had himself a fantastic week last week, and he didn't get any utilization in the passing game. Only 2 catches for 15 yards. On the ground, he can get it done. But can Duke Johnson be able to emulate something like that? Is this Texans offense capable of doing so? I think Duke Johnson in the last 2 weeks has been extremely disappointing, specifically against Cleveland and this past week against New England, who both those defenses should have been able to take advantage of. They weren't able to. I think Duke Johnson's a very risky play, but he has a lot of upside based on the matchup purely. That's why he's at number 28. J.D. McKissic is our number 29. Going from 29 targets in 2 weeks back to 4 targets is a little bit of a unfortunate matter for him. But to be honest, he's still going to have potential upside there. I think he's going to get more targets as this should be a more competitive game. When you go back and you look at the game log of the Washington football team playing against Cincinnati, as soon as Joe Burrow was out, air went out of the building. And to be honest, that entire sideline for Cincinnati disappeared. They had no leadership and they had no structure, and there was nothing kind of set forward with Ryan Finley that they were confident in. So I think this could, especially considering the fact that Peyton Barber came in and had 8 rushing attempts. They just wanted to kill the clock, and they did so. This week against Dallas should be more competitive of a matchup, should be more back and forth. J.D. McKissic should get more opportunity this week. I know the last time he played against Dallas, again, it was a blowout. He didn't get many touches because, of course, they wanted to run the clock out. But if J.D. McKissic could go ahead and be in a competitive matchup, the passing opportunity and the receptions will be there. Giovani Bernard is my number 30. The thing that I'm excited about Giovani Bernard is a potential matchup. He plays against the New York Giants. They give up the 8th most points to opposing running backs. And even though that's the case, Giovani Bernard, again, is going to be in an offense that I really don't trust. Ryan Finley is not a great quarterback. I mean, last season in the 3 games that he started for the Cincinnati Bengals, he had a 47% passing completion percentage. Sure, he threw 2 passing touchdowns and only 2 interceptions in that time, but 47 passing completion percentages is not good enough for us to rely upon that. Unless Giovani Bernard is catching the ball 8 times this week out of the backfield, there really isn't going to be a consistent amount of value, considering, in my opinion, the New York Giants defense is actually going to be a lot better than they have been in the past. They will be able to force Finley to throw the ball against them. I know there's great wide receivers on the Cincinnati offense, but I don't think that they're going to be able to find much success on the ground. I think Giovani Bernard's going to be able to find that through the air, and that's where he gets his value at 30. Nyheim Hines is my number 31. With Jonathan Taylor getting majority of the touches and majority of the snap counts this past week, it makes me think that maybe Nyheim Hines isn't the player that we thought he was. 6 total rushing attempts. I know he had a rushing touchdown called back. That's something that we have to take into account. He had a 2-point conversion called back. So again, that's an 8+ point swing, not counting the yardage there. That, really does make a difference. He still did get 3 receptions on 4 targets. But again, if in fact Jonathan Taylor is getting just as many targets, then perhaps Nyheim Hines isn't as viable as we may have presumed. He is my number 31 because of the fantastic matchup and what he was able to do a couple weeks back against Tennessee. If Jonathan Taylor falls off once again, here comes Nyheim Hines to pick up the scraps. We have David Montgomery as our 32. I don't trust David Montgomery at all. Even though he plays against the Green Bay Packers, they're giving up the 3rd most points to opposing running backs. It doesn't matter. David Montgomery has not proven to me that he can consistently play well in this league. He is not scoring touchdowns. He is not getting enough work in the passing game. And to be honest, at this point, if he surpasses 10 fantasy points, it is a blessing. And we just have to take it with, what it is. I think David Montgomery is just in an offense that doesn't want to feed him the ball enough. And even when they do, they don't get enough production out of him. His yard per carry average, awful. And it's just not getting any better. He's my number 32. Number 33, and I know that was extremely negative. Let me just put it this way. I think there's a potential there. I'm just not too high on it. I honestly think that there is a lot of negativity from me there, but it is what it is. I just can't stop it. David Montgomery just gives me the chills, and I think, man, so many people wasted picks on him this season, getting him at a quote-unquote discount because of the injury. It still hasn't panned out. Number 33 is Jerrick McKinnon. So here's the thing. If, in fact, Jerrick McKinnon is the starter against the Los Angeles Rams, I think he could produce. I think Kyle Shanahan has really, as of the last 2 years, proven that regardless of what the defense for the Los Angeles Rams have thrown in front of them, they're able to produce against that defense. Now, I think Jerrick McKinnon's a good running back. I think he gets great work out of the backfield in terms of on the ground or through the air, and that's fantastic. But what I'm hoping is that Raheem Mostert can return this week as the starting running back. If that's the case, then Raheem Mostert, of course, is a higher ranked running back, and we'll talk about that on Thursday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, kickoff with Kirchhoff, and on Sunday morning. But regardless, I think Raheem Mostert should be a pretty decent play if, in fact, he does end up coming off the IR and playing this week. But either way, if it's Jerrick McKinnon, then we fire him up as our 33, and we hope for the best there. James White's our 34. Again, with Rex Burkhead dealing with a little bit of an injury, if in fact James White gets more utilization of his backfield and gets as many targets as we anticipate him to do so, if he can keep up with this 8 to 9 to 10 target range, he's going to have innate value in half PPR, full PPR value just going forward. The touchdown upside is going to always be there for him because he is a Swiss Army knife of this offense, whether you line him up in the slot or out of the backfield, should be a great play. 35 is Chase Edmonds. Similar to James White, his utilization is pretty much primary to what exactly are we going to anticipate in terms of the game script. If you get blown out, sure, there's going to be more utilization from the receiving back, but this upcoming week, we get both these teams playing against each other. I think Chase Edmonds could see more work, potentially through the air or on the ground. I would love to see him get more utilization, but I don't think that's the case. They know that Kenyan Drake's their starter. That's why Kenyan Drake got more work out of the passing game there. And I think as we continue, unless Chase Edmonds is scoring touchdowns, it's going to be tough for him to keep up with the kind of consistency he put up last week. The last running back I wanted to mention is Leonard Fournette, specifically because, again, he does get majority of the targets out of that backfield, will have the upside of a PPR base, And if he's going to be the goal line back stealing rushing touchdowns, then why not go ahead and invest and potentially start him as a flex and get that value if, in fact, Ronald Jones is going to disappear. It's pretty much a coin toss between the two of them. But I think this upcoming week against the Kansas City Chiefs, they want to run the ball, and I think they'll be able to do so consistently and successfully. All right, those are my top 36 running back rankings on the week. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Later this afternoon, we'll have our tight end video out. Again, it'll probably be way later, but I got to do 2 videos today and 2 videos tomorrow because of the 3 Thursday games. Anyway, thank you, everybody, for watching. Make sure you click the like button down below. And until later today, I'll see you guys. Peace.